Good afternoon or good evening as well, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar organized by the European Platform for Democratic Elections, EPD. You know that the title of the webinar is Georgia's 2025 Municipal Elections, a critical test for democracy and repression and isolation. So that's the title of the topic and the webinar. My name is Leon Natroshvili, and I'm the Executive Director of the International Society for Fair Elections and Democracy, briefly ISFED, and it is my pleasure to moderate this important discussion today. Unfortunately, Eto Buziashvili became unable to fulfill this task, and we made a last-minute change, so I will moderate today's webinar. As for the background of the topic, just to introduce the topic to you and describe the main goals we're going to have today and main questions we would like to answer today for those especially who are not aware of the situation right now, ongoing situation in Georgia. Maybe you know that on October 4, 2025, Georgia held its nationwide municipal elections, the first major vote since the controversial 2024 parliamentary elections. For many of us who have spent years observing and supporting electoral processes in Georgia, these elections were not just another local contest. They were a test of whether Georgia's democratic institutions could still function under conditions of polarization, repression, and shrinking civil space. The ruling Georgian Dream party secured an overwhelming victory, winning all 64 mayoral races and at least 80% of seats in every municipal council and 90% of seats in 58 municipalities out of 64. So, this means that, of course, behind these numbers, lies a deeper concern, the integrity and competitiveness of this process itself. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, for instance, an OSCE ODIHR election observation mission was unable to come to Georgia and observe the elections because it was invited. It was not invited, I would say, on time. Also, in addition to that, none of the credible domestic observer organizations, including my organization, ISFED, was able to conduct a full-scale domestic observation. And this represents an unprecedented regression, I guess, in Georgia's modern electoral history. Observation has always been a cornerstone of electoral transparency, a safeguard for political confidence, and its absence leaves critical questions unanswered. The questions like, were voters truly free to make their choices without pressure? Were opposition parties given a fair chance to campaign, and etc.? Unfortunately, in 2025, those questions remain largely unanswered. These elections took place amid a worsening democratic environment in Georgia, one marked by the imprisonment of opposition leaders, the weakening of media independence, and the new restrictions on civil society through Foreign Agents Registration Act and related legislation and the steps taken by Georgian authorities. At the same time, Georgia's relations with its key democratic partners, the EU and the United States, remain strained. The path toward European integration, once a unifying national goal, has stalled, unfortunately, and domestically, a growing climate of fear and disinformation has further polarized the public. From an election observer's perspective, the 2025 vote underscores how elections can be technically organized, yet democratically hollow, when pluralism, competition, and independent scrutiny are absent. So our goal today is to analyze what this election means for Georgia's democratic trajectory, both domestically and the international context, and to discuss how we, as part of a global democratic community, can respond to to this trend of isolation and repression. And to do so, I'm joined by three exceptional experts and speakers. First of all, I would like to introduce Laura Thornton, Senior Director for Global Democracy Program at the McCain Institute, with extensive experience in democratic governance and international election observation, and a longtime friend of Georgia as well. Professor Ghia Nodia, a political scientist and director of the Caucasus Institute for Peace, Democracy and Development, one of Georgia's most, I guess, respected voices on democracy and geopolitics, and Mamuka Andguladze, chairperson of the Media Advocacy Coalition and non-executive director at the Center for Media, Information and Social Research, who brings invaluable insights into the current state of Georgia's media and information environment. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining the webinar and contributing to the topic. And let's begin our discussion by exploring both the international and domestic perspectives shaping Georgia's current moment. Each speaker will have about 8 to 10 minutes, and after that, we'll go to the Q&A session. Please write your questions in the Q&A section of the webinar. You can find it right below, right, I guess, at the share button. It's on the right. You can write your questions there, and we'll try to raise them during the Q&A session afterwards. Okay, let's start from Laura. Laura, I prepared two questions for you to discuss, and I would like to, hear your answers on these two questions. But please don't hesitate and don't limit yourself, I guess, in answering these questions. If you think that some other topics also are more important and relevant to cover, please do it. So these two questions are the following. From your vantage point in the transatlantic democracy community, how have Georgia's 2025 municipal elections been perceived in Washington, Brussels, and other Western capitals, particularly given a lack of international monitoring and signs of democratic decline? So this is the first question. And the second one is about comparison between Moldova and Georgia. You recently visited Moldova and observed the processes around 2025 parliamentary elections in Moldova. And how would you compare Moldova's trajectory to Georgia's today in terms of democratic resilience and external engagement? So the floor is yours, Laura. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Levon, and thanks to EPDE for organizing this great panel. And it's so nice to see familiar faces. I did, as Levon mentioned, I am a longtime friend of Georgia, but also lived there for, gosh, almost 7 years. And so it is heartbreaking, frankly, for me to see, compared to when I moved to Georgia in 2014, it's shocking the precipitous decline that the country has taken. So in answer to your first question about perception by Western capitals about the municipal elections, I would say I don't think people were particularly surprised. I mean, it was a pretty foregone conclusion, particularly given that there was no unified opposition really competing in them. But also, as you laid out perfectly, Levon, I mean, this was just like one of 1,000 cuts. We have already, I mean, the 2024 elections were quite catastrophic with regard to failing to meet any standards of election integrity. But on top of that, as you outlined, you have attacks on civil society and the media. You have opponents in prison, for goodness sakes, including heads of opposition parties. You have restrictive legislation. You've protesters being beaten to within an inch of their lives. You have the courts totally co-opted. Now the Election Commission, which actually, when I came in 2014, was a pretty trusted organization, which is now, that is just in the hands of the ruling regime. So there was no conducive environment to make these elections anything other than what we expected, which was a full sweep by the pro-Russian Georgian Dream regime of all levers now of government. So I don't think it made a humongous difference to Georgian Dream's authority, but now it's just nice that they have control over every single level of government for them. And I say pro-Russian because, of course, this is a Russian operation and this is a victory for Russia. Of course, Russia had an easy game to play in Georgia because they have the government in sync with them, which is different than, so to pivot to your second question, which is why this is so different in Moldova. I did a pre-election assessment in Moldova, but anyone who follows Moldova understands that rather than having a supplicant ally, the Kremlin had an opponent in the government in Moldova. And so Moldova, I would say, in answer to the trajectory question, is on a very different trajectory based on the results of their elections. But I wouldn't say they're out of the woods by any stretch. I think I think a scared and humiliated Russia can be a very dangerous Russia. And they spent hundreds of millions of dollars in Moldova doing a multi-vector war. And what I mean by that, I don't like using influence operations because it sounds too light and delicate and like, oh, we're just nudging people. No, this is warfare. And I think we need to start treating it as warfare. And what Russia did in Moldova was everything from, flooding the information space with poison, not just through TV and Telegram and TikTok and all that, but by actually purchasing individuals, priests being flown to the Kremlin, being flown to Serbia, paid directly by the Kremlin to then go back and spread disinformation, but also to actually campaign on behalf of political parties and political actors in Moldova. Then you had, of course, cyber attacks, more kinetic attacks. You had people being trained by the Kremlin to cause street fights and other activation in Moldova. And so this was a multi-vector war that involved the church, that involved influencer, that involved information, that involved cyber threats and attacks. The difference, and of course, these tactics have been used in Georgia. They were used in Ukraine. We know these tactics. I think Russia was really pulling out all the stops in Moldova, though, and testing sort of the limits of what they're capable of. Here's the difference. Moldova had a three-pronged response and defense and actually went on offense. First, in the case of Moldova, you had the institutions. So you had the government that was going at it. And it was a cat and mouse game because every time, Russia sets up a TV station, the Moldovan government shuts it down, but then they find a way and then they shut it down. So it's a constant vigilant battle, but the Moldovan government took that battle on. They did training in cyber intelligence. They were shutting down crypto sites in Kyrgyzstan that were sending money directly to do vote buying. So it was in part the activism and the proaction of the Moldovan government and the institutions, including the Central Election Commission, but also the interagency coordination to get ahead of this hybrid attack. One. Two, there's a political response. So you had the ruling party that was also politically taking on this battle and making a clear distinction between them and the pro-Russian parties that they were competing against. And then finally, and I think this is really important, is you had a civic response. Civil society in Moldova was doing some of the most creative work that I have ever seen. And I've lived in a lot of places. They were not in the capital. They weren't in Chisinau. They were out in the countrysides. They were working through influencers. They had independent media things. They were doing TikToks with priests. They were reaching out to everyday Moldovans. And they were putting out the message preemptively why it matters for Moldova to be in the EU. They were showing images of life in Romania versus life in Russia. They were on a preemptive, full-scale narrative offense in Moldova. And that was not just in urban areas, that was across the country. And they got influencers, local leaders, local messengers on board. So I think civil society and independent media did a great job. So I would say one thing, and I'll end here because I'd rather hear from Georgians. Um, One thing that both countries have, and an external challenge that both countries have, is the United States has abdicated its role completely as someone who's a country that supports democracy. And that means cutting off all aid. And this affected Moldova too, it's affected Georgia. No support for civil society, no support for election observation, no support for independent media, no cyber trainings. All these things really, really, really had an impact. In Moldova, thankfully, the Europeans were already there, but then they even stepped in and filled a lot of that gap. But I think it's a challenge that we need to also confront of how do we promote democracy and protect democracy in places like Georgia when one of its biggest allies, the United States, has washed its hands of this kind of work. That's a fight for me to have, by the way, as an American, and we are doing our best. But it is a challenge that we're going to face if we're trying to build alliedship in the democracy space. It's all in there.
Thanks a lot, Laura, for your insights. And clearly, we can say that there are many similarities between Georgia and Moldova, but also there are a lot of differences as well. And the context is somehow different in Moldova. As you mentioned, the ruling party is different, and the um, instruments the society in Moldova uses are more robust. And in Georgia, for instance, and they have a better stance to fight, for instance, Russian interference in the politics and so on, so forth. Of course, there are many differences between Georgia and Moldova, and unfortunately, it makes the situation in Georgia, I guess, more complicated than in Moldova, and fortunately, Moldova possesses all the instruments in their hand to fight Russia's interference compared to Georgia, of course. Thank you so much for your insights once again. There are some questions in the chat, and one of them, I guess, is for you, but we'll go to the Q&A sessions later. And now I would like to give the floor to Professor Nodia. Professor Nodia, I prepared two questions for you, but still don't limit your answers with these questions. So the first one is that the Georgian Dream's total victory has effectively eliminated meaningful political opposition at both national and local levels. What are the implications of this for Georgia's democratic system as such and institutional checks and balances? And the second one is, in a broader geopolitical context, how does this consolidation of power and Georgia's growing distance from Western allies reshape its position between the EU and Russia? So the floor is yours, Professor Nodia, please.
Thank you, Levan. I will make several points. As I understand these questions, I have to put these elections in the broader context of Georgia's domestic and international policy. So the first very brief assessment of these elections, of political importance of these elections, is that they were not politically important. I mean, elections, even on the elections day, which was October 4th, elections were number two event. Number one event was a huge rally, which promised to change government by, peaceful overthrow of government, which was a little bit strange formulation, but anyway, this was the important event because we did not know outcome of that event beforehand. We could guess, we had our guesses, but we did not know the outcome. In terms of municipal elections, we knew the outcome, and so there was nothing interesting. Because, of course, we know the reason, because a large part of the opposition boycotted the elections, and large part of electorate supported this boycott. So government did not really need any kind of fraud or anything to conduct these elections. We don't know, I mean, how good they were technically. So because of, as you, Levan said, level of observation was very weak, but it did not really matter because, you know, there was no need for any fraud. The only number, the only outcome of number describing outcome, which, you know, could conceivably be important, and therefore Georgian Dream had a motivation of fraud, was turnout number. Yes, because of course, because of the boycott, it's important to show that elections were fraudulent. No, I mean, sorry, legitimate, and the number of the result of turnout is low, but it's sort of okay for municipal elections. But we don't know how real those turnout numbers are. But that was the only real outcome that mattered. This is the result of 2024 elections, basically, because the main outcome of the 2024 elections was not just that Georgian Dream kept power, but that you know, Georgian public, or that part of the Georgian public we call pro-European, pro-democracy, which is also oppositional at this point, lost faith in elections, right? So before, I mean, in September of 2024, there was really big mobilization for elections, and there was considerable hope that we can change government through elections. And okay, there were some people who were skeptical, who say that GD will never go through elections, but still there was a real motivation so that we have at least check whether it's possible to repeat like precedent of 2012. But the result was that, and the way that most of the public, or most of the politically engaged public, I would say, decided as a result of that elections that you cannot change government through elections. And the result was parliamentary boycott first, and boycott of elections was sort of, you know, logical continuation, as people considered it, and many people considered it. If you boycott parliament, and if you say that government is not legitimate, then what's the point of participation in municipal elections? So what was politically important prior to elections was not electoral campaign of the government or the opposition. It did not matter. What mattered was very nasty and acrimonious debate within the opposition between the kind of boycotters and anti-boycotters. And I will not discuss what is right and what is wrong, but provided these situations that we have, this public mood that we had, okay, I think that in that situation, it did not make sense for some opposition parties to take part because they did not have any chances and they knew it. And so it was just, you know, maybe they were positioning themselves for the future by taking part in elections or not taking part in elections. But, you know, taking part as such did not matter. And when we don't have too many public opinion polls, but what we had, a single basically public opinion poll in summer that showed that also the oppositionally inclined electorate was more or less more split between pro-boycott position and anti-boycott position. So across the country, most of the opposition supporters were supported participation in elections, but in Tbilisi, where the more politically engaged people live, the majority was for boycott. So that made any project of changing power in Tbilisi, which theoretically was possible because in Tbilisi opposition won quite strongly the parliamentary elections, but it was hopeless by this year. But if you cannot change power by elections, so what you do? And so this is kind of an impasse. I think we are living a political impasse for a year already, and it is impasse for the opposition, but it's also sort of impasse for the government as well. Impasse for the opposition is that we cannot accept this government. We cannot say that, okay, no, elections were sometimes fraudulent before in Georgia, so what can we do? But we have to prepare for our chance. No, I guess after Georgian government, its prime minister Ikobachidze said that we are suspending negotiations with the EU, which meant really that we are ending negotiations with the EU. So we are kind of rejecting Georgia's strategic path, which has been there for 20 years officially, but in broadly speaking, maybe for 2 centuries of the path of European Georgia. So we cannot tolerate this government, so we cannot just wait for future elections because it does not make sense. So we have reversed in public understanding that it's not that elections should bring change, it's other way around. First we should achieve change and then elections will make sense again. But before we change, we have regime change basically, elections don't matter. I'm not saying that everybody in Georgia believes that on the opposition side, but I would say that majority of politically engaged public believes that. So, what can we do then? Okay, and October 4th, I think, was this day when we saw that, okay, we cannot change government through elections, as we knew beforehand, but we also cannot change government through another kind of velvet color, whatever revolution, peaceful revolution. I mean, this rally was quite big. It was impressive. Its size was impressive, provided people are standing in the street for more than 300 days already. So it showed that people are not giving up and they want real change. But I think most people were also deeply skeptical of this promise of organizers that this will be last day of Georgian Dream in power and we'll finish our job by 8 p.m. or something like that. No, it was very botched, miscalculated, non-professional, whatever you call it, irresponsible attempt of, taking building of president, whatever. So it left people deeply frustrated. So we cannot change things neither by elections nor by another peaceful revolution, right? So that's the outcome. So what happens then? I think some people said, okay, the main thing is what happens starting from 5th October, when there is no expectation of changing anything through street protests. Okay, I think what happened on the 4th of October, I don't mean elections, of course, but I meant this botched attempt of peaceful revolution, that would be followed by a depression on the opposition side, that, okay, there is no point in doing anything, we should just reconcile, accept the unavoidable, and, just, go on with our lives. And on the other hand, the expectation is that the Georgian Dream government will take advantage of this attempt of overthrow of government, basically, and you know, to move the level of repression to a higher level. Okay, they could arrested people with no reason, basically, before, but now they have reason, real reason, legally, technically, to arrest people. So why not to take advantage of it and do a massive attack? So that's what we are looking at now. These two indicators. When it comes to depression, yes, I guess people had been depressed already and are very concerned, but the protest did not stop. There was still protest on the 5th of October, 6th of October, etc. It was low numbers, of course, but we had low numbers also before 4th of October, but sort of this continuing protest means that people have not given up. And that's important because it does not allow Georgian Dream government to claim that, you know, we are going to business as usual. I think the first reaction at late evening of October 4th was that opposition is finished. Okay, they did this stupid thing, and I agree that it was stupid, but they hoped that now opposition is finished, protest is finished, and we have won, basically. But it does not look like that yet. And yes, there are also high level of repression, but you know, they arrested 35 people so far, but they had arrested quite a lot before. So it's not game changer. So October 4 was not a game changer in favor of the opposition, but it's too early at least to say that it has become a game changer in favor of GD government. And but if, and I have to make my last point, I know I'm talking too much. What about international environment? That's becomes the most important dimension, because if you don't reconcile to the situation, don't give up, don't accept the situation as it is, but you cannot change it neither through elections nor through revolution. So what can you do? And what is left? And basically what is left is some kind of divine intervention, some kind of miracle, but it's not really divine, it's about the West. So divinity is replaced by the West. So the West should do something to change the situation, because otherwise it cannot be changed. And what the West can do, of course, there are two things. Not only one is sanctions, and I think that I would welcome any new and heavier sanctions on members of Georgian government, especially on Bidina Ivanishvili, but I'm skeptical that you know, new sanctions will be by themselves game changer. Another larger issue is Ukraine. I think many Georgians believe that if Ukraine really defeats Russia, that will be some kind of game changer and dramatically weaken Georgian Dream position. But that remains to be seen. But at this time, I think we are in an impasse. But Georgian Dream is also, I mean, it's much better position. It's government, and there is no imminent threat of losing power for them. But they cannot go. Their aim is to go back to business as usual mode, and they cannot do that because it's important for them to normalize relations with the West. They had great hopes for Donald Trump. That is kind of kindred spirit, but it does not work with Donald Trump. Of course, it does not work with Europeans, so they are internationally isolated. Their supporters have this feeling of continuing crisis, so they are also in an uncomfortable position, and we don't know how long this impasse will continue. Thank you, and sorry for talking too much.
Thank you, Professor Nodia. You provided very comprehensive analysis of the processes, and yes, that's right. Of course, this was not only purely kind of electoral issues, right? So we should, you know, look at this process broadly. and it has many layers. Unfortunately, it's very hard to analyze the current situation and the past in Georgia without, addressing various aspects of politics in general, not only electoral process. And as you mentioned, of course, we had parallel kind of processes. On the one hand, we had pre-election campaign and electoral processes, and on the other hand, we had some political process which was not, which had its individual, I guess, implications. So that's why it's very hard to combine all these kinds of factors and issues together and to have a big picture what is happening right now. And also what is important, this is an ongoing process. And as Professor Nodia mentioned here, so there are still some questions remaining. What will be the future of Georgia right now? For instance, the authorities are arresting various protesters each and every day after the October 4, and they are accusing them of overthrowing the government. So that's why, of course, primary question right now is that how far the Georgian authorities can go in the future. So will they go after each and every actor, which are independent actors in Georgia, or they can somehow calm down and be more kind of loyal towards some kinds of process. So these are kind of questions which will be answered, I guess, in the future. It's very hard to answer these questions right now. And with that, I guess I will go to Mamuka, a friend of mine. We were former colleagues when we worked at Transparency International. So Mamuka is a media expert, and so Mamuka, I will have two questions to you. You know that independent media have faced growing legal, financial, and political pressure in recent years. And considering this situation, how did this shrinking media space influence the electoral environment and voter perceptions during the municipal elections? This is the first question. And the second one is the following. We have also seen a rise in state-aligned and anonymous online propaganda networks amplifying anti-Western narratives. And how influential are these disinformation campaigns, and what steps can be taken to protect the information space and rebuild public trust in journalism in general? Mamuka, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Levan. And of course, first of all, thank you personally in EPD for organizing this event. Sorry, it is quite important to have this kind of discussion to analyze from different angles what is going on in the country, which is literally in a very deep political crisis, and how the ongoing authoritarian changes or direction of Georgia toward authoritarianism has an impact on various stakeholders, including on media outlets and the role of the media. In order to have an informed decision, the citizens should have access to the unbiased, to the objective media outlets. But at the same time, in order to provide this kind of information, you should have media which is able, and the environment allows and enables it to inform general public about the real issues, real challenges, and real solutions. Like civil society, political opposition, activists. Of course, media is also one of the subject of repression. Georgian Dream, the election is not just like, you know, better than, and your colleagues better than me, that election is not only election day, it's like a pre-election campaign. And like in case of Georgia, it's pre-election campaign is not just the period the law prescribes. Generally, as a practice shows, it starts even before. And the media as a watchdog is accompanying what government or other political parties or key stakeholders are doing. And it should be able, that media, to inform the general public. However, what we watched these days and this period, especially since 2000, it began like increase the pressure on media into 2023, but especially in 2024. The key purpose of the Georgian Dream, among others, is to shift Georgia's orientation from EU towards authoritarian tendencies, and to maintain political control, especially because of the light of the ongoing protests and contested elections, suppressing the protests, and at the same time legitimized by adopting these repressive laws. Legitimize repression by arguing that we are not punishing somebody arbitrarily, just violating the law. Just recently, a couple hours ago, Communication Commission has began implementing the restrictive legislation, which concerns, in this case, broadcasters, and preventing what is quite important, domestic and international accountability. Media outlet is in a very, very difficult situation. Even before, it also was challenging for media, but these days it faces literally existential threat, like civil society organizations, etc. And when you speak about the media, the topics during the pre-election campaign should be quite various. But the media, because of the restriction of resources, because of operational cutting of operational possibilities, content regulation, etc. Of course, it is impossible to cope with all these challenges and focus to all those issues. And artificially, objectively, the resources have been restricted. When you speak about the elections and impact of media during the election, you have like dozens of repressive laws, which not only restricts, as I mentioned, the possibility to receive fund. Why it's important to underline these factors that I'm sure that the audience knows, but still I would like to repeat that Georgian advertising market for media was never sustainable for those media outlets operating in Georgia. So that's why cutting funding possibility to receive funding from abroad is crucial, vital, especially for independent media outlets. We are having dozens of political prisoners, and one of them is Ghia Nodia. She managed, even during Shevardnadze and Aslan Abashidze, these are the persons before Saakashvili's government who runs the country, and especially Aslan Abashidze's region was an autocratic region. She managed to build, along with her colleagues, independent, unbiased media outlets. And when the advertising market is not properly operating and the objective reasons prevail over the subjectives, and it's not just your personal fault that you're a bad manager, you can't run media outlets, then the only funding source was donor funding. And independent online media outlets, including Batumele, BN, etc., and Gazeti, they have received all awards by international community for their activities. And this person is now in prison. This person is now in prison. Of course, this is the demonstrative punishment of Ghia. She had been arrested in January, had sent the signal towards all media outlets and journalists. And just like to remind the audience, last year ahead of elections, Batumele has published, based on the sources, very, very interesting and warning report, how the local security services was profiling the whole region, knowing weaknesses, health issues, personal issues of the citizens, in order to abuse, to approach individually. So this profiling citizens, which then, if you look at the broad picture, contributed among other to rig the elections. Just a couple of days ago has been published a report of my colleagues in my organizations that during the 1 year, more than 400 incidents has been registered against media outlets. When you speak about the incidents, these are the cases which have been verified by different sources. More than 120 incidents involve physical violence. Just imagine the conditions the media outlets have to work. Besides that, keeping in focus that you have to inform the general public what's going on, the meetings, and etc. And none of the perpetrators have been held accountable, despite the fact that there are verified cases, identified police officers, along with so-called illegal militias, especially in December and January, where they attacked various persons, including journalists and media outlets. So we speak about the total impunity. When we speak about the legislation and cutting operational possibilities, now we have to mention about the ongoing court trials. This was also a dominant topic during the pre-election campaign. Yes, the opposition was divided. Part of the opposition was not participating because they stated earlier that there are several demands: release all political prisoners, new parliament elections, but the rest of our opposition have not participated. But still, ongoing court trials were important. And those media outlets have managed to explain to the general public why those persons are political, why the persons are charged based on political motivations. And that's why they closed down the court reporting. Even worse, I just tried to check on the internet whether there are other cases when security guards of the judiciary are physically abusing, beating the journalists. Lawyers and relatives, or just those persons who are supporting the political prisoners. There are dozens of cases when security guards are not allowing to enter the courtroom, or like shutting down the court reporting, but physically abusing, threatening. This is something new, even for Georgian reality. And the list is very big. Access to public information, this should be definitely mentioned, and boycotting. I think Laura was still in Georgia and working quite actively when boycott was still an active issue. We have a heavy form of boycotting when Georgian Dream is not attending the discussions at independent media stations, or not giving proper interviews to online media outlets, depending on their technical infrastructure. Even worse, the GD friendly media outlets, to which unfortunately public service broadcaster is belonging, to which we are funding, they're not inviting, and this is practice exists right now, they're not inviting not only political opposition. In case of the public broadcast, it's a little bit different, but it has very, very biased reporting. These private mouse spaces, propaganda mouse spaces, and quite influential ones, they're not inviting the representative of opposition to the talk show, to the live coverage, representative of civil society organizations, or just persons who speaks differently, or like spread different narratives than the Georgian Dream. And when you speak about the possibility, just imagine a Georgian citizen, it's like wants to understand what's going on in the country, and it's a dominant station like Imedi or Rustavi 2. It shows one side story, and there is no possibility to hear, to ask the questions, and to just see propaganda. But at the same time, the independent media outlets, online media outlets, do not have a possibility to raise ordinary questions in normal interview environment to the representatives of the Georgian Dream. And this boycott, of course, it has a huge impact. And journalists are dealing every day with captured state institutions. They have been beaten, there are no justice. Special security service has been, which was an obligation to deal with the crimes against journalists, they have just abolished. It was not doing anything. It was not presented any result, but still, even on the paper, Parliament was the only institutions where journalists were able to literally trace the representative of the GD. And a couple of years ago, they adopted very repressive regulations, formally as a pretext to protect journalists' right to have like normal accreditation process, but in reality, it's a punishment against independent journalists. Just imagine a situation, investigative journalists are conducting investigations. They have an obligation of the right to reply. And as a rule, at the end of the investigations, they're approaching the person and asking the questions. And if a GD person do not like the question, after one question, they can tell like, stop recording, or I will ask that you be banned. And we have dozens of this kind of cases. And you quite actively mentioned about disinformation. If you look at the and the data regarding the sources of information on political affairs, television still remains a key player in Georgia, but at the same time, the role of internet is growing. And if you look at the map of the challenges, it's television and it's an internet. We have, and your organization is also quite actively reporting and monitoring, increased number of disinformation spread on social media. Even before Facebook, when dozens of times reported that they have abolished fake accounts, etc. But now we have like several key players which are spreading Georgian Dream narratives. There are official persons, they have official pages, and with just one click they can spread through thousands of pages in news. Then they have so-called experts who might like write a huge letter which nobody reads, and especially when on social media who reads like 10 pages later. However, this is just like intro. Then the GD media outlets will produce a cover letters and etc. cards. This is like spreading the key messages. And there are also so-called trolls, not identified persons. And there are also an army of government officials. And this is a way how it's a dominant, trying to dominate the opinion on social media and pretend that that criticism toward GD, that you're in minority or something like that. It's a way how you can oppose. Unfortunately, there are no countries in the world if a government is not cooperating with independent experts on civil society organization. It is very hard to cope to oppose the propaganda. Plus the legitimacy when the representative of de facto or de jure government representatives spreads anti-Western narratives, especially in the regions. It increased legitimacy of these narratives in the eyes of public. And media literacy is, among other, quite very useful tool. Just like audience should understand how to consume media, how to find these independent media outlets, the sources, etc. But if the schools, universities, and state agencies do not cooperate with you, of course, it is like, unfortunately, very, very difficult, if not impossible, to make some kind of big improvement in this regard. Last but not least, regarding disinformation propaganda, these days, Georgia, formally we are still a EU candidate country. We got this status in December 2023. And now you're in the European Union, when they speak about the disinformation, etc., they speak about DSA regulations, they speak about Media Freedom Act. Now, instead of conduct this kind of reforms, like to oppose propaganda, disinformation, to have this kind of tools, new or etc., we now dealing with poor propaganda. Unfortunately, it's like a dirty also propaganda, using some personal information to undermine the credibility in the public eyes. But despite all these challenges, I always try to look everything in, positively. We witness it unprecedented solidarity among independent journalists. So unfortunately, we have like independent media journalism and the rest, because those who are pretending, mimicking that they're journalists, in reality, they are part of the propaganda. And the Mzia Marlobeli's case and the solidarity towards me from the real colleagues and from the general public, and the heroism of civil activists, civil society organizations, and journalists to resist this propaganda, it gives me hope. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that de jure, they have adopted all kind of legal acts which practically forbids independent journalism and creates a very, very good environment for Russian propaganda. But we don't need to have Russian propaganda anymore, because local stakeholder GD is very, very successful to spread in Georgian language the narratives. And your colleagues and other colleagues, including me, we have reported or like witnessed dozens of comparative study which shows that like the narratives of authoritarian countries, the bad guys are sharing the experience amongst themselves quite actively. So, and just to wrap up in 2 words, yeah, media, unfortunately, objectively was not able to keep the general public informed about really what's going on in the country in very details. However, they managed to focus on key issues. These are that protest. These are the issues related with politically, court hearings of politically motivated cases and cases of corruption. But since the opposition itself was also divided and etc., we used to have reporting about what in details in each villages. Of course, it was not. However, I think under current conditions, they did a great job. Whatever they could, they did even more and better than I could even imagine.
Thank you, Mamuka. Thank you so much for your emotional speech. So the media environment and media in general is a topic for Mamuka, which can talk, during the day, all the day. So that's why he's one of the most prominent, I would say, advocate for journalism in general and journalists and media, and he's very emotional on this topic. Thank you so much for your insights. Now we can go to the questions. We have 6 questions actually, and I'll try to distribute these questions to the speakers, and at the same time, if you have any final thoughts, final insights, you can also integrate in your answer these thoughts as well. Let's start from Laura. So there are 2 questions for Laura here. First from Agnieszka Filipiak, she's asking about so-called Russian operation. You mentioned that these elections were a Russian operation, and she's asking for evidences for that, why it is called Russian operation. And second question came from Robert Lel. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing correctly the surname. So he has 2 questions. Laura, excellent analysis. Yes, the United States has stepped back from promoting democracies worldwide. However, does that mean it has stepped away from building pragmatic relationships for countries such as Georgia, which could be stronger in other ways? That's the first question from Robert. And the second one is, will geography make a difference in how the West treats Georgia as opposed to Moldova? And other countries as well. So these are questions to you, Laura. The floor is yours.
Great. Yeah, I think on, the level of co-option of Russia, of the Georgian Dream regime, you could look for evidence of a direct line of, let's say, orders from the Kremlin directly to the Georgian Dream regime and their marching orders that happen in that way. There's some stories that bear that out in terms of former employees of Ivanishvili, who is the oligarch who made his fortune in Russia and left Russia and has now been controlling Georgia since 2013. I would rather look at what do people say and do? What are the actions and what do they mean? Okay, so I have never heard Georgian Dream criticize Russia. I've only heard them mimic Russian talking points, whether they're talking about the West, the EU, or Ukraine. They've become a sanctions evasion route for Russia. So Russia benefits tremendously from Georgian Dream's cooperation in evading sanctions because of its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. They've resumed flights. Georgian Dream officials have been labeled by Western nations as Russian agents. But why not listen to the Kremlin itself? who regularly talks about how Georgia's its loyal little puppy, and how it's basically doing its bidding, serving again as the sanctions unit, Georgia allows Russian officials to travel freely in Georgia, but doesn't allow in Russian opposition or Russian freedom fighters. So I would just look at actions, look at words, and there's really very little daylight between the two. There's also anecdotal reporting on, like, for example, if the security forces have been infiltrated and whatnot. I'll let the Georgians answer more on those things. I'm not quite sure I understand. Oh, the question about, so America doesn't support democracy anymore, but are there other relationships? Yeah, I guess if America, which I think it has to a degree under the Trump administration, pivoted to more transactional based arrangements with nations, including autocrats like Saudi Arabia, whatnot. Sure, I suppose. I'm not sure what sort of goods that Georgia will be providing that the Trump administration might value. Certainly doesn't help democratic activists. I personally believe values are interests and interests are values. So I think the American foreign policy should lead with a values-based approach, because ultimately having democratic nations around the world serves our interests. I am here because I believe in Georgian democracy, full stop. You had me at Georgia, but I can also make the case as why Georgian democracy is important to all of us. And if we keep letting countries on the frontier, the tipping point countries, fall into Russia's realm, we are challenging something much bigger than the region. We are challenging an entire world order that we've established that's based on certain principles and values. And I think ultimately that comes home to roost, which is exactly what Russia was doing in Moldova, because they saw it not just as Moldova. They wanted to encircle Ukraine. Odessa is a big reward for Russia. How great would it be to have a pro-Russian government in Moldova? It's also a Trojan horse to infiltrate the EU. Oh, are there American bases in Romania? Well, I guess there are. Wouldn't it be convenient to do attacks from Moldova to Romania? And it's also a laboratory to test different warfare tactics that can be used against all of us. And if we think that these tactics that were used in places like Georgia or Moldova won't be used against us, they have been used against us. We have evidence of this. I want to end just really quickly, because I know we're out of time. But just on the other question, I think Ghia talked about it a little bit, about, I think we are in a place where it's like, what makes democratic movements succeed, particularly in an environment where elections are not feasible, or the sort of an overthrow through protests is not feasible. It is so hard. However, we have seen examples of this, and I think I've lived in a lot of different countries, and I was in Indonesia, and because I'm old, during Suharto, and if you told me that Suharto would be overthrown, I would have said you're mad. But through widespread civic resistance, civil disobedience, not just in the capitals, but all over the country, boycotts, strikes, shutting down, we've seen countries able to do this. And I have really great faith in the Georgian people who believe in democracy and believe in their future, that they're not going to give up on this fight. And I do also believe that the West, including the United States, has got to do more to support those efforts and attack those pain points for the Georgian Dream regime. Do the Megabari Act. I can't advocate specifically for the Megabari Act, but I do advocate specifically for sanctions and tough actions against the regime. So I think it's an internal Georgian people uprising and external pain points to apply all the pressure and weaken as we can. But I have a lot of faith in the Georgian people, and they've done it before.
Thank you, Laura. There are some follow-up questions from Agnieszka Filipiak, but I'm sure that she will contact you directly afterwards, and you can answer this question more comprehensively. And now I will go to the questions to Professor Nodia. The first one is about, from Anna Ohanian. So the question is the following: what do you see as the key structural factors or conditions that have contributed to Georgia's democratic decline? That's the first question. Second question from anonymous attendee is that why is the West not giving the opposition a cold shower about constant infighting and blaming the West for not helping? The opposition needs a good dressing down and should be told that it is our Georgian sense to fix our problems. We failed to talk to our people and people failed us. So this is a kind of comment as well. And two more questions. Mr. Nodia, did Georgian opposition activists do everything to reach out to people in regions beyond protesting in Tbilisi and posting on Facebook? This is also a question from anonymous attendee. And finally, the question from Marie Karin von Kumpenberg. Hi, Marie Karin. What could potentially unite the opposition to become a strong force? The floor is yours, Professor. We can't hear you. Please turn on the microphone.
Yes. Okay, there are many structural factors. I mean, these questions really would require much longer talks than my initial remarks, but I will try to be brief. There are lots of structural factors. One is one can say it's structural, call it structural, it's fear of Russia. And Georgian Dream was quite skillful in manipulating the fear of Russia, which was strengthened, of course, after 2008 war, 2008 invasion of Russia. And the main message, which I guess keeps Georgian Dream in power so far, is that okay, you want to rely on the West, but the West cannot really protect Georgia, it cannot protect Ukraine, and so if we rely on the West, we provoke Russia, and then Russia attacks us, and we are not kind of defended. I mean, of course, large part of that reasoning is demagogic, but yes, there is a point. We are very vulnerable to Russia, and we are bordering with Russia, unlike Moldova, for instance. So that's the most important structural factor. Okay, we can speak about culture, that, you know, another point that Georgian Dream manipulates relatively successfully is kind of more conservative cultural mood of large part of the population, especially older generation, rural population. But okay, these divides are there in every country. In every country you have more conservative people, culturally conservative and less culturally conservative. But okay, Georgia have been, you know, removed from the West for a longer time. So maybe in Georgia there is a greater ground to use these factors. But okay, that's, as I said, it really comprehensive answer to this even single question of structural factors would require a long lecture. Now, why there is no dressing down from the West against the Georgian opposition? Okay, Georgian opposition is quite weak, and if we talk about opposition parties, yes, again, I think there are reasons to criticize them for continuous infighting, among other things, and that also addresses the last question, and you know, not being well organized, being too short-term oriented, not having long-term strategies, etc., etc. So, and it's very popular in Georgia to criticize the opposition. I guess people who are oppositionally minded, broadly speaking, are very critical of Georgian Dream, but they also love criticizing Georgian opposition. It does not, I don't think it's one thing to have this kind of criticism, legitimate criticism of the opposition, but if one speaks about, dressing down or some offering cold shower to opposition broadly understood for, continuously showing, this protest against the Georgian Dream, I think that should be admired. I think maybe our opposition movement is not sufficiently organized, and that's true, but this resilience really of the civil society broadly understood, and this persistence despite all kinds of repression, which could include beatings, which could include arrests and lots of different threats. Despite that, people are still showing that we don't accept this, and we are continuing to fight. That's actually admirable, and I don't think it deserves a criticism. Of course, some actions, maybe specific decisions like announcing that we'll end Georgian Dream government on October 4 was not very wise, and I think many people criticize that, and I criticize that today in this panel, but that is also understandable, that people are fed up with, or impatient that, okay, we are protesting this long, but okay, we should do something active. And so that was the mood of the part of the public, and so sometimes the opposition movement generally, I don't mean opposition parties, may do something unwise, but in a very difficult situation, Georgian civil society finds itself in. You cannot expect everybody to behave wisely all the time. And yes, it's as I said, people love to criticize opposition for many ways. So that relates also to the third question, that do people go to regions? It's one of the first things to say, that you are too focused on being in the city. Okay, actually, protests are not only in Tbilisi. Okay, in Tbilisi they are every day, but there are also in smaller towns. So it's not only Tbilisi protest, it has just to be said for the record. And yes, I guess opposition parties could do more to reach out to broader public, and there's legitimate criticism, but one should also remember that opposition parties are attacked all the time, that Georgian Dream actually openly announced its plan to outlaw opposition as such. So the resources are very limited. Therefore, they try, to use those resources the best they can. But yes, specific critique may be justified. And unity is, yes, that's another big criticism, that they cannot achieve unity and the opposition is fragmented. That's how it was almost always been. Opposition also under previous governments, opposition was fragmented for most of the time until, some very special person like Bidzina Ivanishvili appeared in 2011. They were also weak and fragmented. So yes, that's a problem. But for instance, in before 2024 elections, I think opposition did a reasonably good job. they organized into 4 main kind of divisions that could overcome, did overcome, even by, according to official results, the election threshold. So I guess they behaved generally quite rationally, but okay, the resources of the regime were stronger. So yes, I am all for criticizing the opposition when this criticism is legitimate and based on facts. But okay, that's yeah. If we had stronger political party system, we would not have Bidzina Ivanishvili in power. That's another structural reason, maybe. But we have those resources that we have, and we have to use them the best we can. And in the end, I want to just agree with what Laura said in the very end. I think many Georgians have this mood, so it's kind of ambivalent mood. On the one hand, we don't see the light in the end of the tunnel yet, but on the other hand, there is some kind of optimism which cannot be rationally explained, maybe because we don't have pathway to victory. Nobody sees that clear pathway to victory. But on the other hand, okay, we see also erosion on the government side, and we see this general balance of powers that, yes, government has its resources and it's stronger, objectively speaking, in that sense, but okay, government is really against the traditional kind of vision of majority of the Georgian people. So it pretends to be nationalistic government, basically, and takes advantage of very raw and basic instincts, nationalist instincts, but basically it fights against Georgian sovereignty, right? It's obvious that it is returning Georgia to the Russia's fold, and it tries to deny that it is doing that, but it's sort of obvious that it's doing that. So deeply structurally, it is in a weak position, basically. So that's why I guess this Georgian optimism of the Georgian public, of Georgians who refuse to give up despite these very difficult odds, I think is still there, and it makes us think that we don't know when, but maybe in 2 months, or maybe 2 years, or maybe 10 years, but Georgia will return to the path which is natural for it and normal for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nodia. There are 2 more questions about more technical issues, and I will try to answer these questions very briefly before we wrap up. So the first question is from Nikita Oshuev, and he's asking about the violations during these municipal elections. Is there an understanding of the scale of the violations? Because there were some reports on that. Unfortunately, Nikita, there is no kind of good, I would say, a report on that. And because, as I said, none of the credible domestic and international organizations could observe these elections. So that's why, unfortunately, we don't have a big picture on that. And the final question is about the Slovak observers and the registration of Slovak election administration officials as observers for the municipal elections. I don't know exactly about the Slovak observers, but I can say that this is the usual practice in Georgia when some other countries' election administration officials, EMB officials, come to Georgia and register themselves as foreign international observers. For these elections, what we can say that there were not many so-called Western countries and democratic countries, so who were registered as observers here, but yeah, there were Slovak observers. But what was the role of these observers and what they have done during this process? We don't have any information about that. So I guess we are done with these questions, and we finished our webinar not very late, I would say. Once again, thanks a lot to the speakers of this panel. So this is an ongoing process, as I said, and we'll have opportunity in the future to speak about new developments and updates in the future, I guess, and the audience also will have an opportunity to listen to the experts like our today's panelists in the future, and let's hope that the developments in the future in Georgia will not be that negative as we expected and expect now. And of course, the insights we have heard during the webinar from our speakers should be taken into consideration by various stakeholders, domestically and internationally as well, by political parties, by civil activists, and by our foreign partners. And yeah, we'll see. So it's an ongoing process, as I said, and it is a very vibrant, I guess, process. So thanks a lot once again to the speakers. Thanks a lot to the audience and the persons who asked the questions, and I hope we answered these questions. Thanks a lot also to the EPDE as an organization, and stay tuned. We're gonna have more events in the future, and I wish you a good evening or day. Thank you.